Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Everett O'Keefe, and I'm the founder of Ignite Press. I am excited about today's livecast. One of the things that's wonderful about being a publisher is helping to bring other people's messages to the world. And sometimes those messages impact one or two people like directly, like the message is designed to just impact one person at a time. Every now and then, though, we're given the opportunity to bring a book to market that we know is going to change lots of lives. And each time it changes one life, changes many lives in the process. This is why I'm excited today about our book launch for Saving Lives and Saving Dignity by Doctors Alan Molk and Robert Shapiro. I have got them waiting in the wings to answer questions and to talk about this wonderful book that I quite frankly know is incredibly timely as it deals with end-of-life decisions. These doctors are literally changing lives every day, and this book is going to simply magnify their reach and that impact. So let's go ahead and bring them on. And actually, while I'm doing this, if you are there in the audience, certainly feel free to comment, to ask questions. I'll do my best to pass them on to the doctors. Also, if you're watching this and you think there are people who need to really strongly consider about some of these end-of-life decisions, by all means, share this broadcast with them and share the book. The book, by the way, is on sale today on Amazon. In fact, it is available for 99 cents as a launch special. The Kindle is there for 99 cents. The paperback, I think, is at $14.95. And I'd encourage you to go pick that up today. So let's bring on the doctors. Here we go. Bob and Alan, it is so great to see you guys. And you guys have really created something special here. Let's start. I'm going to kind of ask each of you questions here. And first, Alan, tell us about your guys' background. Tell us who you are and how you come to this point.
Sure. Thank you, Everett. Like my cousin, Bob Shapiro, I am a board-certified emergency physician. I've been practicing emergency medicine since 1980. My whole career has been working in the emergency department, both in New Jersey and here in Arizona, where I reside. And like most ER docs, we are wired to save lives, take care of patients in a very expedited way, see everybody who walks through the door, save lives. When the situation arises, much of the time we don't deal with life-threatening situations. But over recent years, we find ourselves dealing more and more with patients who are seriously ill with life-limiting conditions. In addition, what prompted me to write this book was my mother's journey with Alzheimer's. She passed away 8 years ago, and her downward trend, her suffering with dementia, and my personal suffering, seeing her go through what she was going through, opened my eyes about people who have end-of-life diseases, people who aren't doing well, and people who need dignity, to preserve their dignity, which is part of the reason why this book is called Saving Lives, Saving Dignity. Much of the time, people's dignity is compromised in many life-limiting conditions, as I mentioned earlier. And I saw this as an opportunity just to put my thoughts and my feelings in writing. And I did so even before she died, as my own personal catharsis. So this was somewhat counterintuitive, because people who know me know that I'm a very upbeat, fun guy who likes to joke around, likes to have fun. So writing a book that's of a serious nature, but at the same time realizing that this topic should not be swept under the carpet. This topic is not taboo, and talking about it, having the conversation about it, is always in the end beneficial and helpful to patients and their families. And I've now made it my life's passion to continue to do this, to promote the concept, to change some of the culture that not every patient needs aggressive care in the ICU that is often futile, does not change the outcome, but many of these patients are much better off receiving dignified comfort care, such as palliative and hospice care, and ultimately the patients and the families are very grateful for that. And even though many physicians don't want to talk about it, we need to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, because thank you for that perspective. That yes, as physicians, you're there trying to do everything possible to save lives, extend life, and yet there comes a time where saving and extending life does not serve the patient. It does them no good. Bob, let's come to you. You know, what's the perspective that you brought to this book as a physician for all these years? You know, and what is a challenging situation you find that this book helps address?
Okay. Well, yes, this has become a passion of mine and also of Alan's, because we both believe that medicine is supposed to be humane, and the onset of the technology over the last 50 to 70 years has outstripped our ability to make people, to relieve suffering. And I was always taught and believe that physician's duty is to relieve suffering. You know, if you can, ultimately we're going to die. If we can prolong it, that's great. But it's not the only issue. And I think some of that I felt, and I think Alan agrees, that has been lost in the medical training over the years. So I originally spent a lot of time researching a book which was quasi-academic and met with a rather tepid reception. When I presented it to Alan, he was extremely enthusiastic about it, and he rewrote the book, putting in a lot of the human factor that was so lacking in the book. And together we've made, thanks to his daughter Ariel, who did the wonderful job of editing, we've made I think a very readable book designed for the audience being the layman. So.
Well, I speaking of that, let me bring this up and show this cover a little bit more carefully. So, saving lives, saving dignity. There's no accident that you have, you know, what appears to be someone on a ventilator and, you know, and holding hands, trusting hands in the front of this book. Alan, you told me a story just about in the last week or two of you dealing with patients. And, you know, it's quite touching, because right now with COVID and everything, people are, boy, ventilators have been discussed more in the last 12 months than I feel like they've been discussed in eternity. I mean, honestly, when you think about all the conversations in the media about ventilators and that type of thing. Alan, describe for us the type of situation that people find themselves into that this book really addresses.
Everett, this largely has to do with people either having or not having advanced directives. In other words, making their wishes known in the event that they end up in a situation that is either terminal or very life-limiting. There's been no better, more dramatic example than this COVID pandemic, where so many people have died. So many people had no idea that 2020, 2021 would be their last year on Earth. So many people ending up with severe respiratory distress, many times not reversible, and then having to go on a ventilator with a hope that it will salvage them. And I walked through the ICU recently at one of the hospitals I work at, and I couldn't believe how many people are on ventilators who looked so gravely ill. Many of these people, 70 plus, even 80 plus years, many of whom never had advance directives, many of whom had no living will, and were automatically put on a ventilator without any thought of what the outcome was going to be. Many of these people staying on these ventilators for days to weeks, no family around them, all alone, only to ultimately have care withdrawn because it clearly was a terminal situation. Dying in the ICU on a ventilator is an awfully lonely way to go. Not being able to be surrounded by your family and friends. Survey was done a few years ago about physicians, about where they would want to spend their last days. And 80% said, not in the ICU, not in the hospital, but at home, surrounded by their loved ones. And seeing all these patients on ventilators who probably would not have chosen to be on a ventilator in the first place, had they had advanced directives, could have facilitated a much more dignified and, dare I say, beautiful death. There really is a concept called a beautiful death, even though so many people, again, consider the topic. I said use the word taboo earlier, but rather a topic they do not want to discuss or talk about because it's too difficult or too painful or too uncomfortable. But yet it's been shown, and this is a very important point, I believe, that having the conversation is only temporarily uncomfortable. But in the long run, people who've had the conversation and have made their wishes known about end of life after doing their due diligence has been shown to be beneficial pretty much 100% of the time. So the book encourages people to have the conversation, to talk about their end of life wishes, to research what it's like being on a ventilator, what it's like being on dialysis, what it is like being quadriplegic. There's a lot of education out there so they can make informed decisions about having the end of life on their own terms. And this is something I feel cannot be emphasized greatly enough.
I think I go back to a situation we found ourselves in. My dad was dying of congestive heart failure. And he was at a point where the only thing keeping him alive was dialysis. And he hated the dialysis because he would always come home freezing. And it would take him a day or more to recover. And then we had to go right back to dialysis. And yet the dialysis wasn't going to do anything for him. Like, it wasn't like there was no positive outlook here. All that was happening was extending his life for a short period of time because of other systems, shutting down and that type of thing. So we had this conversation with Dad, and we just said, Dad, you don't have to keep doing this if you don't want to. And he looked up and he said, you mean it's okay? And we said, yeah, Dad, it's your choice. It's okay. And we had a crying moment, but that really freed him up. It was, he needed to know he had, he needed to feel like he had permission, to really make that decision. And, and as a result, his last days weren't torturous, and we were blessed in that time. So I greatly appreciate what you guys are saying. Chris posed a great question, and let me bring it up, and then we'll see which of you wants to answer it. She says, can you give us some suggestions for starting conversations, both with loved ones and with doctors? My parents are in their 70s, and we've never done this. Who wants to take that one?
I'll start, but Alan, I'm sure will continue. I think the first thing is to indicate that you understand their situation. Dad, as you point out, I know you're suffering. I know that maybe you don't want to continue, but you've avoided making that decision because of us. And a lot of times It's family. The patient is afraid to make a decision because they're afraid what their family will think, so they continue to suffer because their daughter or sons, can't deal with it. So I think that's one of the issues. And then talk about, what their goals are, what do they want, how do they want their life to be, and explanation. This may be more from the physician point of view of what is involved in an aggressive care, what is involved in care going into the ICU, and so forth and so on.
Excellent. Alan, would you mind sharing the story you told me a couple of weeks ago about the conversation you had with the family in the hospital? Do you feel like you can share that?
Certainly. And this story is really a reflection of how the lay public, meaning not the medical community, but non-medical people, how little the lay public really knows about what involves aggressive treatment. For example, the one case that stands out, and there are many, many, many more of these. This is just one case. There was a gentleman who was in the ICU in his early 80s on high flow oxygen with COVID. His chest x-ray looked terrible. He had other risk factors. He was diabetic. He also had a history of heart disease. He wasn't going to do well. His prognosis was poor, and it was clear that he was deteriorating. He had no advanced directives. So I was asked by the ICU intensivist to speak to the wife. Couldn't do it directly because of COVID. Patients' families are not allowed in the hospital unless they are actually truly end of life, meaning at death's door, or if it's a child, or if it's someone who's mentally incapacitated. Anyway, he was still quite alert and quite with it, but doing poorly from a COVID standpoint, deteriorating quite rapidly. So at this point, it behooved us to talk to his wife about what his wishes are, because she was his power of attorney. So I got on the phone. She must have been about 80 years old herself. I explained to her what was going on, explaining that the next step would be that he would have to go on a ventilator if he was going to get further treatment, maybe or likely not make it, but that would be the next step. And I asked her, what are his wishes? And she said, I really don't know. I then asked her, does she know what a ventilator is? She had no idea. I used the word respirator. She still had no idea. So I did some education on the phone just for a few minutes. And then I invited her to go to a computer and look up what it's like, go to YouTube, look up what it's like being on a ventilator to get a visual impression of what this involves. She then informed me that she didn't know how to use a computer, but fortunately her grandson was coming over. And I said, have your grandson show you, and then we'll talk again in about an hour. I called her back in an hour. Her grandson had shown her what, using all kinds of videos, all kinds of educational pieces from YouTube, or what it's like being on a ventilator. And her response was, oh no, he would never have wanted that. So we were able to come to a very nice agreement saying, okay, we were just going to make sure he's comfortable. We'll keep him on the oxygen. He's unfortunately probably not going to survive. But if you would like to come over and spend time with him here in the ICU, you can do so, because he is likely end of life. And she was very grateful for that. And about an hour later, she and her grandson showed up, spent time with him, and he died peacefully 2 hours later. And it was a beautiful ending. We avoided the ventilator, which would have been futile. But this example was just yet another almost painful reminder as to how few people really have the conversation ahead of time, which is always the best time to have it, not when you're in a dire situation, when decision-making becomes chaotic, more painful, and often just more difficult.
I just want to add one thing, would emphasize one thing which Alan pointed out. It's very important to realize it's the patient's wishes. Oftentimes the family wants something done without talking to the patient. So it's really important to know, what would grandma want, or what would grandpa want? Not what you would want or what I would want, but what would they want?
And done through the filter of knowing the potential outcomes or the likely outcomes, right? If there's really not any prospect for improvement and it's just extension, what's really the value of extension at that point? So challenging. I'm glad you guys brought up the respirator, because I think that there is a lot of education required in not just the respirator, but not other things as well. Because I think, for me, I used to always think, oh, it's just you put a mask on, but it's pressurized, so it forces me to breathe. Like, that's what I just always thought it was. And then my daughter, who's a nurse in a COVID unit, is explaining, oh no, you need to know what the process is, and right, that the tube going down the esophagus, correct, or down the trachea, and having to be on anesthesia for that, right, so that you're not fighting it and rejecting it, and just all the miserable thing. But Alan, you had also quoted a statistic for me that I thought was rather eye-opening about the percentage of people who go on ventilators versus the percentage of people that ultimately survive. Do you remember that number? Do you want to share that? That was rather sobering to me.
The percentages vary, but clearly the going on a ventilator usually implies a poor prognosis. Some people do eventually get off the ventilator, but they have permanent lung damage and they have other organ damage from COVID. COVID is a extremely unfriendly virus, still much not known about. There's still a lot to be learned. But so many people who end up going on a ventilator usually go on a ventilator because they have what are called comorbidities, meaning they're either morbidly obese, which is not good for you. They have hypertension and diabetes, neither of which are good for you, or they have congestive heart failure, or they have emphysema, all of which already makes them compromised and lessens their likelihood of a good outcome. So, some people do get off the ventilator, but I never cease to be amazed how many people stay on the ventilator for weeks, end up getting a tracheotomy, and those that survive have a very
I was
quality
talking
of life and may have opted not to go on a ventilator in the first place had they had the conversation.
I was talking to a pulmonologist who pointed out that the use of ventilators early on in a lot of conditions is very helpful. But he said what happens with COVID is the use of the ventilators is end stage, and usually people do really poorly, just as Alan pointed out.
Got it. And I understand that even not that this is meant to be a conversation specifically about COVID, but that treatment regimen has changed since March, of last year, as far as where the ventilator gets utilized and that type of thing. Katie McDonald had a question for you, gentlemen, and she asks, what is the best way to complete an advanced health directive or medical POA?
Well, it's actually quite simple. You just go online and download it and fill it out. If you want, you can get a tailored document that says, in this specific scenario, this, in this specific scenario, that. But at least in California, all you do is to go on and go healthcare power of attorney or advanced directive for healthcare, and it's right there. All I have to do is fill it out, get two people to witness it. It's very simple.
I want to come back. I have been read. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alan.
I was going to say, here in Arizona, all you've got to do is go to the website of the Attorney General's office, and the forms are right there that you can download or print and fill out. I think it's often helpful to have the forms reviewed by an estate planning attorney if your situation is more complicated.
Yeah.
But it's not hard to do. And as I said, California is no different to Arizona. I'm sure no different in any other state where these forms are easily available online and relatively simple.
All right. So, Alan, we're getting some delay on your end, but that's okay. Let me. I've been remiss in not plugging the book again, so shame on me. That's my job to do here, is to make sure you guys know how to get the book. Currently, you can get the book "Saving Lives, Saving Dignity: A Unique End-of-Life Perspective from Two Emergency Physicians" on Amazon. The paperback is available. The Kindle's actually on special today for 99 cents, and I would certainly encourage you to pick up the Kindle version of the book, or the Kindle and the paperback version. And this really is one of those books that you may consider getting for someone else in your life, whether that is somebody with whom you wish to have an end of life discussion. It might be easier to hand them a book than to start that talk, but you still need to start that talk. I'm grateful because we just had this conversation in my family a week ago, and honestly, it was after talking with doctors Molk and Shapiro about their book and the launch and that type of thing. And so we could just sit down with my family and say, look, here's what it looks like. What do we really want? And we're like, okay, well, this is what we want. And it was great. We'd never had that conversation. And by the way, it wasn't a hard conversation. It was a 5-minute long conversation of, would you like this? Would you like that? And that made it very easy. And I know that if I end up in a hospital, my family is equipped. You know, they're equipped, and those wishes are known. I do need to do it in some official form, in the form of an advance directive. One of the things that occurred to me, and either of you guys can respond to this, but my daughter talks about a full code and what that means, and I had no idea what a full code meant. Bob, can you tell us what a full code means in a hospital environment?
It means you do quote everything, which means CPR, intubation, put a tube in the lungs, and medications, so that you attempt to do everything in order to resuscitate the patient.
Okay. And is CPR like we see it on TV?
I don't know what it looks like on TV, but in old people, it's often horrifying because their bones are brittle, and you start pounding on somebody's chest in their 80s or certainly in their 90s, and you wind up breaking the breastbone, the sternum, or a lot of ribs. It's not benign at all.
Yeah, that was kind of why I brought that up, is because I don't think most people understand that, even just the process of CPR can be incredibly traumatic and break ribs and that type of thing, causing more trauma, right? So, I know we do this to help extend someone's life or save somebody's life, but there's trauma in the process of attempting that.
Well, the CPR was designed for someone who had basically, say, a good heart, and something happened. They got an abnormality of the heart, or they had a heart attack, so their heart stopped beating. So you do initiate CPR. So somebody who's 40 years old, and on the street, and it might be life-saving, but as Alan's pointed out, in a 90-year-old who's already in the ICU, it's just basically torture.
Mm-hmm. In fact, Wiley brought up a comment here. Says, I'm fine with being intubated, but if I'm going through liver, kidney failure, cognitively impaired, it's obvious my body is failing, I'm not going to get back to being who I am. DNR for me, right? As in, and DNR meaning do not resuscitate.
Exactly.
Wiley also brought up an interesting question about euthanasia. And is that something that you guys address in your book about active? Well, I guess, I don't know. I guess I'm not sure exactly how to define euthanasia these days, because at one point we always talked about it being active steps to end a life, and yet removing treatment that is artificially extending your life, right? That could be defined as euthanasia. What can you guys address that?
I'd like to correct that. That's
Thank
a
you.
misconception.
Thank
It
you.
is
That's why I
not,
bring it up.
and
Because I'm ignorant.
even even most religious groups, like such as the Catholic Church, do not equate removal of treatment with euthanasia.
Good.
And in fact, there's a thing called dual effect. You're allowed to give a medicine such as morphine to make a patient comfortable, even if the effect may be to shorten their life. So,
Okay. By the way, Alan, your microphone is not connected, so I can't come to you with any questions. I tried to unmute you, but it won't let me. One option you have, Alan, if you'd like, is just to exit the stream, exit the broadcast, and then just come right back in and see if it allows you to connect. Oh, there you are.
There we are. Okay.
Fantastic.
I was just going to elaborate a little bit on what Bob was talking about the concept of euthanasia. Of course, euthanasia in its purest sense is not even legal in America. Some states do have what's called medical aid in dying, which is in itself, some people would consider it controversial. But if you really look at it, for example, it's legal in California, it's legal in Oregon, Colorado, New Jersey, Montana, Vermont, and a few other states. If you look at the criteria for someone who would even qualify for medical aid in dying, it's extremely strict. For example, someone with dementia would not be able to qualify. It's kind of a topic in itself. Both Bob and I think there's a place for it. Most of the time, hospice care and palliative care do a great job when consulted and when allowed to do what they need to do and consulted early enough to help the patient's symptoms, help pain, help nausea, help anxiety, help the feelings of breathlessness, symptom management, decreasing, lowering suffering, eliminating suffering, and transitioning to a peaceful death. And people who truly are end of life. And we've spoken a lot about COVID, but there are so many other medical conditions that really aren't curable. Stage 4 cancer, dementia, Lou Gehrig's disease, end-stage emphysema, end-stage liver disease and cirrhosis. There's a whole slew of conditions, all of which would benefit from palliative and hospice care, especially when the diseases are advanced.
Excellent. Now, Chris had this comment and question here. She says, I heard you two are related but met later in life. Can you tell us about that?
I'll do it. Okay. Well, there's an interesting family story. We have Bob and I are second cousins. Our mothers were cousins. They are sadly both deceased, but their ancestry is from Poland. And both Bob's grandmother and my late grandfather, who were brother and sister, were able to get out of Poland prior to Hitler's invasion in 1939, when Poland was invaded. There were at least 6 or 7 other siblings who were Jewish, who were never heard from again. And the only two to have survived are Bob's grandmother, who ended up here in America, and my grandfather, who ended up in South Africa. And we ultimately reconnected, our parents did, and we finally met in the mid-1970s. And by gosh, we've been close and friendly ever since, and now we've co-authored a book together. So that's pretty special.
So I came to, it was Idlewild, JFK Airport, I believe, pick up this guy who was carrying a guitar and wearing a cowboy hat from South Africa. And we've been friends ever since.
That is incredible. One of the things that I will tell you, we as a team have appreciated working with you guys is your camaraderie, your ability to give each other crud, kind of like brothers, basically, right? And just giving each other grief out of fun. But just your overall sense of humor, especially approaching what is such a difficult, what can be such a difficult topic, right? This shouldn't be a difficult topic, but I guess we make it one. And we just appreciate the levity that you have and that you express. I mean, case in point, Alan, you're sitting there. I can't see you anytime without you wearing a baseball cap. And I don't know if you wear one around the ER all the time as well. I tell you.
Being a big Red Sox fan, I can tell you, Yankee fans would benefit from reading the book too.
even Yankee fans. Well, terrific, excellent, gentlemen. I appreciate your time here. Thank you again for taking the time to create really what is a very special book, Saving Lives, Saving Dignity. I encourage everybody to read it. Honestly, it's one of those things where, so many times we put it off because we don't think we need to have this discussion yet. And yet suddenly we find ourselves needing to have this discussion. I think COVID's been a great reminder of our mortality. I mean, our mortality has always been here. Though we think we're going to live till 80s, 90s, whatever, things just don't always work out as planned. And I appreciate you guys writing this book to help us prepare for something that really is certain, right? It is certain. So thank you again. So everybody pick up your copy of Saving Lives, Saving Dignity, again, available on Amazon for 99 cents. Share it with others that you think could benefit from it. Give it to your loved ones, young and old, to begin this discussion about end of life. Again, doctors, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you also for watching. I'm going to take us out. Take care.